Good morning to everyone except Travis CI. Love to see all of you here. Love to see all of you excited about the new technology that you're learning. Um, and yeah, I think, how do I say this? Yeah, the pain of learning something new with new syntax and documentation you're not used to, and not really having anyone to show you besides maybe like a couple of people like Ian and I. I think that's a good learning lesson because you'll do that a lot on the job. There's going to be features that you have to go implement with new technologies and frameworks that um, maybe no one at the place that you're working has any experience with. So I think it's good that y'all are kind of diving into that. I know it can not feel great sometimes, but keep pushing. You have the ability. Um, anyways, we are going to talk about kind of going to dive pretty deep on sessions and cookies today, um, deeper than we have really at any point in Turing, just because of this switch kind of gives us a little bit more flexibility in Mod 3 to dive a little deeper, to try some new things, and yeah, I'm pretty excited to do that. But I dropped a kind of a long message in Code Help that's going to kind of like guide y'all today. And I'll give you the rundown of like the structure of today's class. So we're going to start off with like any burning questions or any clarifying questions that you have about anything with like sessions or cookies like right now, and or anything any clarifying questions about what I'm asking you to do for the first start of class. Then you're going to go into about a 45-minute self exploration time where it's kind of similar to how we've done classes before, where I encourage y'all to open up the study hall and work through that, work in there if you want. I encourage y'all, if you want to work with like one other person, you can hang out in here and I'll put you in a breakout room. Or if you want to work by yourself, totally fine, you can go and do that. So you've got some options for how you do this self exploration part. And there are some options of like what you explore. So those links that I have in there are kind of go in order of like, basically, here I am at the beginning of my session in cookies exploration, and I need to start there, or moving kind of along to what I'm going to implement later today, or later this morning, which is how to use a session to remember a user. And there's a lesson plan for that you can kind of like run through on your own. If you're like, you know what, we did this in the group project, I'm going to do a quick refresher on that, and then I'm going to go look into like the security of like how a session works and what the security implications are. Totally okay if you want to do that. So there's some options with what you spend this time on, and honestly, there's no like right or wrong. It's just kind of like, what do you need for this morning to kind of get you ready or at a point to dive into using sessions and cookies in a couple of different ways. um, what else do I want to say? Yeah, the ProPublica thing, you don't necessarily have to worry about that until towards the end of class this morning. We're going to use this API for a bunch of classes, and the one thing that's going to be different on all of our machines is our API key. So you'll need to request an API key that will take like 30 seconds. It's a form on that link that I posted, and you request your API key, they give it to you like immediately, and that is going to be the big difference in like what my code is and what your code is just that key to like basically authenticate us when we hit that request. So that's the only thing you'll need for later in the class, but you could do that like right when we start that portion. But basically what we're going to do is it's going to be cool, we're going to hit that API, and then we're going to use sessions and cookies to remember some of that data as we navigate our website after we've hit that API. Cool. What else? What else? I think that's all I wanted to say, but I wanted to, like I said, open it up for questions, just to start. If there's anything that y'all had on your mind that you were thinking about related to sessions and cookies.
It's just seeing something in chat about sharing Netflix. There was actually a plugin. There was like a browser plugin that would actually share your Netflix cookie with someone else that was like synced up on the service, so that they could actually log in with your Netflix account without actually having to give them your credentials. I'm pretty sure Netflix clamped down on that in a hurry. But yeah, it's interesting what you can do with a cookie by, like mimicking someone else. There were a lot of viruses and stuff back in the Windows days, like a decade ago, that was basically going through and scraping all your browser cookies and like sending them to servers so they could like log in and mimic you and all kinds of interesting stuff.
Yeah, I think like once you kind of understand how this auth process works, it's pretty cool to like then deep dive into like what are some of the common attacks of like how people try to, gather these tokens that we're using and make things less secure, and then what has Rails done to defend, just by default, against any like a number of these attacks. In the security section, that link kind of goes into some of that, which is pretty cool. But okay, if y'all don't have anything, here's what we'll do. I will kind of send you off to go. And like usual, this room will stay open and I'll be around, to for you to answer or to ask questions as they come up. You can join the room and do that. I'm not sure what Ian's plans are, so I don't want to speak for him. But yeah, this will be open. And what I want you to do is build in your first break so that we can be like ready to get started right when we come back. And let's plan on coming back at, let's say, 55. And I'll write that in the thread of that message in Code Help. And let's plan on coming back at 55. Like feel free to do this kind of how you want to. And if you, like I said, if you want to be in a breakout room with someone else, then just stay on the call. And once other people have left, I'll put you in a breakout room, and you can work in pairs like that. Okay, that's it. Go forth and session it up. 55, you got it.
See ya.
Thanks, Adam.
Pause the recording unless they ask a question or something like that, and that way we're not recording dead time.
Yep, absolutely.
Cool.
I have a question for you.
What's up, Max?
I am having an issue running bundle on the mock tracker project.
Okay, let's check it out.
I can make this bigger if.
Yeah, I need it bigger.
Yeah.
Cool. Let's try to delete the gemfile.lock.
Amazing.
You might have said I've done this before.
Yep. I'm sorry.
Don't be sorry. This is like, that's just the first thing I always try. So like now you know, because like first thing to try is like, okay, the gemfile.lock is like especially when I get like can't find gem bundler, I'm like, all right, like it's looking in the wrong place for bundle first.
Yep. Great. All right. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. What's up, Phil?
Hey, Tim. I don't have like a super specific question. but one of the videos, just the first one you linked there, kind
Yep.
of talks about like how Rails, as a framework, is sort of unique in that it stores session data on the client. Kind of just curious, like how does that compare to what other frameworks do? Is that a very specific Rails thing, or is that becoming more common that like session data is stored client side, or is it more difficult to see it server side? Like what's the implication of that?
Yeah, I can't say if other frameworks are doing it or not. The reason Rails does it is speed. Basically, they're they're using their like kind of like an encryption method combination of a public key and private key that only the Rails app knows about, like on the server side, to like figure out if you can access the session data or not. And the way that it's basically, you can think of like a session as a special cookie that is encrypted. All right. And so that's like the biggest kind of like leap in like high level. It's like, all right, this is a special type of cookie. We put the encryption key on the client, and then every time the client sends a new request with that key, under the hood, Rails is kind of like checking that key against its secret key, along with like, you know, more complex encryption functionality, and like asking like, is this actually the person? Whereas there are other ways to do it where there would be like a sessions table, and that table would continuously be creating rows in the table for sessions to look up like specific users, and it would be continuously like clearing that data if it was a large enough application. So that because you don't need sessions to persist, you can make that that call of like how long they stick around. But we can do that too, like using the cookies. Like we can decide like how long a session should be able to stick around or not. And the trade-off is it's faster to do it the Rails way, and that's why they did it that way. And then I'm not sure, to be honest, like what the main benefits of the table would be, but I bet Ian can enlighten us on like what the table way, like what he thinks about like the trade-off of like storing the sessions in the database. I mean, I know like the downside is it's not as fast, and then the upside, I'm not sure.
Gotcha. Cool. That's really helpful. Was also kind of like along that same what you were just talking about of like a session is basically stored as a cookie. Like if you go to a Rails app, would you be able to see that you're like storing your session as a cookie if you're using the edit this cookie
Yep.
little extension? Okay, cool.
Yeah, you can see it with edit this cookie, or you can see it. I believe it's on the application. Let me. Why can I never remember this? No, it's not that. Command Option I. Command Option I. Yeah, if you go to the application tab of your DevTools, then you can see like all the cookies for a certain site that are
Cool.
stored from that site, and then you can also see I don't think that session storage, the name here, is necessarily the same thing. I'm not positive on that.
Okay,
but
yeah. I just went to the application tab, like just on GitHub, which I think is the Rails app.
Yep.
I'm not sure, but I see in my cookies like there's a user underscore session.
So there you go. Yeah. And so that's like, you can kind of set it with any key as you want. And then that value is actually that like encrypted key that is then decrypted on the server side when it is sent with an HTTP request.
All right, cool. Yeah, thanks for talking through that with me. This helps me like wrap my head around like what's happening.
For sure. For sure.
Sweet. All right. Probably, if it's cool, I'll just hang out here.
It's cool with me.
Interested to hear any other questions that come up.
Okay. Yeah, sounds
Cool.
good.
That's what I'm doing too. I didn't ask, but here I am.
Yeah, that's cool.
Sessions controllers. And within Devise, it automates the creation of it. So under users in our project, we have a sessions controller. And for each of the methods like def new, def create, def destroy, it says super within it. And that's, my understanding is that that comes from Devise and it's already done all of that for us. Do you know what it's masking, or like where I should be looking to unpack what it is that it's doing?
Yeah, I would be looking in the Devise docs is like the first place I would look. And what I assume it's doing is like setting the session and checking the current user against checking if the current user exists, and then checking the current user like against the session ID occasionally. And I think that is my like guess, I guess, at a high level of what it's doing. Is Devise basically does auth for you, and what we're doing here is like we're hand rolling auth, like basic
Gotcha.
auth. Yeah, and since it calls super, I assume that like what it's doing is like also part of the Devise gem. Or I guess we could see like what that controller is inheriting from, but I assume that like part of that hand rolled code is just like how to create a current user, how to check the session against the current user,
Right.
and so on and so forth, which is like what we're going to hand roll.
Gotcha. And so I know that we had some issues like adding in anything else to those methods, like redirect to a different route or something. So we put those in under the like protected, and had like after sign in path, and then it redirect to root. If that makes
Interesting.
sense.
Not really. I probably have to see that.
Okay, here I can share it. So it does like this.
I see. Okay, and when does after sign-in path get called?
So once it does the, once you sign in, which is, I'm pretty sure it's the create,
Gotcha.
it then calls this. But if you try and add anything else to this method, it gets very unhappy.
I see. Okay, so that's probably like some kind of security implication that they like don't want other. They basically don't want you to like change their configuration.
Right.
And they want it to just go straight up to that. What's that controller called that it inherits from? Devise sessions controller. Yeah. Okay. Cool. Yeah, I'm not like totally familiar with Devise, but is that
Okay.
like you read to do that in the docs basically, and then it works? Cool.
And this is just saying, effectively, this is like the inheritance that go to the create method from here.
Yeah,
Is that
exactly.
what super actually is? Okay.
Yeah, super starts running like the code of the same. It's like a polymorphism thing, kind of like. So there's a create method up in the
Up here. Okay.
Devise sessions controller that is being called when you call super from the child. It basically just goes and runs that code of the parent of the same method name.
Got it. Okay.
Yep.
So this is not right, but okay. Thanks. That's helpful.
Yep.
How much are you familiar with Travis CI?
Honestly, not much.
Okay.
I haven't like done the. I don't know if I've ever like set it up from scratch, but I've used it. Like we use it for some of our internal apps. So like I use it to deploy, but I never set up the initial config.
Gotcha. I think we have the like initial config set up, but we're running into a lot of build errors where the gem file doesn't seem to want to build properly in Travis. Do you have any like advice on direction to Google in?
It's like definitely copy and paste whatever error message you're getting with Travis CI, and then
Right.
also if it's the gems not building, I would think like maybe it's like is there a chance like y'all have different gem files or gemfile.locks?
It's possible.
Here's what I want to do. I want to table this until this afternoon when there's like a ton of work time and Ian and I are gonna like pop around.
Sure thing. Yeah, sorry, I'm getting ahead of
Yeah, there's
current
plenty
class.
of session coolness to dive into.
Ice cream party. Like Tim mentioned at the beginning of the class, we've actually never gone this deep on cookies before. But Tim and I chatted about like what we wanted to go over in this class around sessions and so on. 3D printed cookies, not very edible. But interesting trivia. Did you know that through just the regular sort of consumption that you do, your body consumes approximately a credit card worth of microplastics a year, just through like bottled water and drinks and like packaged food and so on. Just little micro fragments of food that you ingest. You ingest about a credit card's worth of plastic.
Yikes.
Cool. I've actually got to hop off the call for a few minutes. I'll be back. Don't forget to record, Tim.
Yep, it's on. Cool. All right, so I will open it up to questions to start. Anything that you read or watched or did that you'd love to chat about, and we can dive into a little bit. Kind of expected this would happen, so I have a different path. Yezi, why don't you tell me one thing about a cookie?
The cookie is lives on the client side, and it stores client information.
Love it. That's perfect. Thank you. Anyone know how big a cookie is? What the size is?
Yeah, it's 4 kilobytes.
Cool. Isabel, I see your hands up. Were you going to answer that question, or you have a different one?
No, I have a question. I asked
Cool.
Ian, but I'd like to hear like your answer as well. So Rails stores your session. This isn't really a cookie question, but it stores your session client side. And I was wondering, like, when is it that you get to like, how are you able to like differentiate like when you're going to store it on a session versus when you're going to store it on your server? Like when you're going to store it on your client versus when you're going to store it on your server when you're using a Rails framework.
Yeah, so this is a great question. And by default, Rails stores sessions. It kind of stores them, I guess you could say, on both sides. But basically, the idea with it's being stored on the client is it's an encrypted, like a session. All it is really is an encrypted cookie. All right, so they're basically very similar, where the session uses encryption to both sign the cookie and use a secret key and a public key to validate that that session is accurate and did come from a trusted source that was set. So basically, You can think of it as the server creates a session and hands it over to the browser as a cookie, and then it's like it's an encrypted value. And so then the next request, the cookie comes back across with the request and hands the server its encrypted key, that is the session. And then under the hood, kind of like behind the scenes with Rails, Rails says, let's check this against our known secret key and ensure that these things are lining up, ensure that it's valid. And if it is, then we say, okay, now you can have access to the session data. So the difference is like sometimes other frameworks or solutions can store will store sessions in a database. And so the trade-off here is if you're storing it on the client as a cookie, instead, it's much faster. It's faster lookup. So you don't ever have to go from like the full path, like browser, server, database. You're just going browser, server, no database lookup. So the speed is increased doing it this way. And to be honest, I don't know what the benefit is of the database side, because like from what I know about the sessions is like it's pretty secure. It's like at standard security across the web, right? So I don't think the security is necessarily something that you're trading off, but yeah, this is like a good one that we can like follow up with Ian on, and like why do some maps store it in a sessions table on the database side, but some do it that way. So that's, yeah, it's a valid approach, just not the way that Rails does it. And Rails has like a configuration that you can change to be like, nope, I'm going to do the database style. So they give you the option to change that. By default, stores it as a cookie. Cool. Cool. So yeah, let's go to Mike.
If the session is stored on the client side as well as the cookie, does the client have enough space? And also, is the session, the memory that the session takes up, is that usually pretty fixed, or it doesn't fluctuate around like a small kilobyte value? Because I don't know if I read properly, but isn't there only like 4 kilobytes like maximum on the client side? And if you have to store the cookie and the session, and I also don't know if sessions can vary in their function, because I know we're just being introduced to sessions, or I am. Like, is that an issue as well?
Yeah, so generally, to prevent this from being an issue, like the 4 kilobytes thing is the max, right? So we store simple data. We store a string, we store a number, and generally that's it. Like that's what we want to store. We can store a hash like as the value of a session or a cookie, but that hash then gets stringified like as it's sent with the request. So it turns into a string anyway, right? So, and yes, this can become an issue depending on what you're trying to store. Size can be an issue, and that's like, this could be, now that we're talking it out, like here's one of the advantages of database storage, right? We don't have to worry about this size limitation, right? Then we're trading off speed. So the one thing that I heard you say is like you have to send the session and the cookie. Let's think of the session as a special cookie, right? Like, so cookies, like there can be multiple cookies. They're all going to be the big difference is the security, right? So a session is encrypted. That's the big difference. It's just a type of cookie, but I can send another type of cookie over that is a different cookie and also gets 4 kilobytes of data store. Yeah. Cool. Did that answer it, Mike? Hopefully.
Yeah, definitely got more color. For sure.
Cool. All right, Adam, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure I was understanding the difference between cookies and sessions, but I think you answered part of it. So it seems like I mean, my gut says we should just use sessions whenever possible for security reasons. Are there times when you should use a cookie instead?
When it doesn't need, when you don't care about encrypting, when you don't care about it
Then
being
why not
secure.
still use a session? Like, why not just have that be the standard?
You might want that cookie to be able to be accessed by another application that is not your own.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
And Mike, to respond to your question about like space, I think reading the Ruby docs, they said that there's other ways to store cookies. You don't have to have the 4 megabyte limit, or there are other ways to store a session. I was a little mixed on that. And you can store it so it's not on the client side, or it's not on your server or something like that.
That would be like, so the alternative would be like a database store with a sessions table and like some kind of cleanup that, goes and cleans up that database like every like 7, like it expire, like you set an expiration date on that row in your database for 7 days or whatever you want it to be, really. And then, yeah, it's 4 KB of data per cookie. Cool. Sydney, go ahead.
So I was wondering like how, because I was wondering if email somehow plays a role in like storage. Because like one thing I was thinking about is like when you go to a new website, like the first thing they do is like pop up asking you for your email. Like, oh, get 10% off or 15% off. And you do it because you're not going to pay full price. But then like after, even if you don't buy something, they'll send you like an email of everything you looked at. Like this, like they capture what you, and so it's like, hurry, this is almost out of stock. Like, is that playing a role in like some of that storage, like storing it almost kind of permanently for you, like this permanent reminder? I don't know. I was just wondering about that.
That's a great question. So I don't know like the intricacies of like how this is done, and I imagine it's probably done a few different ways. But if they have your email address, they can track you and track you across other websites, right? So if like your email address is a great piece of data for websites to then place a cookie on your browser and track what this email address on this browser is like visiting, right? And so it can be like tracking. So then the next time you come over to their site, they're like, okay, like this is all the other things that they've looked at in the past, like however many days or however many weeks, like, and or they could track you around their own website, right? Like that's another thing that could happen, and they can do that by like placing the cookie and then maybe every request like storing the data in the database of like, okay, like here's the cookie that says that this is the email. All right, let's look up this email address that we have for this person in the database, and let's create like a record of like, hey, here's something they did. Here's something they did. And then in that case, it's like you're taking a small piece of cookie data and you're storing more complex information about like where that cookie data went, like navigated to in your own database. And so like, I don't know to be honest, I don't know like the intricacies of like how that's done, but I know like part of it is like a combination of like placing that cookie immediately when they can on your browser and then matching it up with who you are, like what your email address is, and also like maybe it's being like once they have your email, now you can go buy data about that email address from cookies from other websites, right? And that's like, a large part of how the biggest websites make money.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely. Good question there. Looks like Adam, you're next. No? Okay. Max, go ahead.
Yeah, I was playing around with the cookie editor on YouTube, and they've got like lots and lots and lots of cookies, and also on like localhost. That localhost was storing cookies from other Rails apps that I've spun up, like little Etsy shop. It held stuff from that.
Yep.
how is that? Like, what does that mean? I
That
guess
cookie hasn't
because I
expired.
wasn't aware that. Okay.
So sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. You keep going.
I would just like, what is? I wasn't aware that we did any cookies for those applications.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, that's a good question. So, yeah, you might not have, but Rails probably has some built-in cookies to, basically like mark its own territory for some part of the app on the browser and be like, hey, like this is how we know some sort of information. I don't know what cookies you found there. But it's a way to basically like say like, hey, this is, some information on this site about some application, and localhost is probably pretty unique just because like we're running multiple applications on the same, what looks like the same URL, right? So I would think that that's pretty unique, whereas every other like public facing website is going to be is going to have cookies that are only unique to that site. And then yeah, just because we don't set a cookie doesn't mean that like Rails isn't like using cookies to figure some things out about form data or authenticity of a certain app, kind of like behind the scenes, like outside of the scope of like the idea of a user, right? Like we can just think like an application by itself might want to remember things about itself, and that might be like baked into the Rails code.
okay. And just another then quick question on that. How do browser extensions fit into this? Is it a totally separate thing, or do they act similar to cookies in that they're like storing some form of information or changing how you navigate certain websites?
Yeah, I would think, I don't know a ton about extensions if I'm just being honest, but there's no way, like extensions are going to take up way more space than a simple cookie would, right? Like just to run that code, like you have to think an extension is like a group of some code to do something, right? And so like that can't be stored as a cookie because it's too big and it's too like complex. It's not like a simple string or number. Did I miss? Yeah, go ahead.
I was just saying thank you. Sorry.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Did I miss anything in the chat that y'all want to bring up?
I had a question about expirations. It seemed from like the reading that we could set an expiration for sessions, but not cookies. Is that right?
I don't think that that's right. I think you can do it for either. And the thing about expirations is you can't depend on them with a cookie because a user can you got to remember they're set in the browser. So like they're stored in the browser. So at any point, a user could clear their cookies, right? Like you have the ability to do that in your browser. So they could be cleared. Like you can't depend on a cookie to stick around for any sort of time. But I think you can set an expiration date on it from the server side as like part of the thing that you set.
Got it. Yeah, I think V just posted a good example. Thank you.
Cool. Nice. Yeah, go ahead, Ryan.
This could be just like a yes or no answer. I'm just curious. Have you ever run into like in the wild actually overflowing your cookie 4 kilobyte storage or?
I have. You have, Ian? Yeah, go ahead.
All right.
No, I mean it is possible. I mean they only store 4 kilobytes.
Yeah.
So yeah, if you just try to like store way too much, then yeah, it's going to overflow. And it just gets truncated at that point. And then when it tries to deserialize back into a hash, it fails. And then the whole thing is no good. And most frameworks will just throw the whole thing out if it doesn't deserialize properly, then none of it's valid.
Will Rails actually give you a little error message that tells you what's going on, or is it just kind of chaos?
I haven't had it happen in Rails, so I'm not sure how Rails would actually handle that.
All right, I'll just Google that. Thanks.
Cool. B, go ahead.
So it looks like there is a method for cookies called encrypted. So why would you use encrypted cookies instead of sessions?
Yeah, that's a good question. So yeah, we were gonna kind of like show you like how to do encrypted versus signed versus plain text cookies. But I believe that the reason you would use an encrypted cookie instead of a session is like the session is like a special kind of encryption that Rails is using, and maybe you want a cookie that's also encrypted outside of that like specific setup that Rails has done for sessions. But I don't have a great answer on this one.
Session cookie should be encrypted by default. So when that session cookie gets sent back and forth, that way the user can't tamper with it. So there's 3 different things. Sorry, I had to hop off the call, so I don't know if Tim's already talked about this, but there's like just plain text. There's a signed version, which can let Rails know whether the user has tampered with the data. But then there's also encrypted, where the user can't even see what's in the cookie. And the session should be encrypted by default.
Right. Just a follow up on that. So like, okay, so session is always encrypted, and only in Rails is can be client side, but normally is server side. The encrypted cookie is different from a session because cookies are not encrypted by default. I guess I'm still confused why you would choose to use why would you need an encrypted cookie in the client side at all? What is the benefit of that?
The benefit is for you as the developer that you know that the user can't even see what's in there, much less tamper with it, because they have no way to decrypt it.
Right.
The only thing that can decrypt that cookie is your server. And so you're utilizing the storage on their machine, but you're ensured that they're not going to tamper with it because they can't even see what's in there. Where a signed cookie, they can see what's in the cookie, like they can see the key value pairs that you're putting in there, but they can't tamper with them, but they can at least see what's in there. And that can be helpful if you've got like different sort of like partnerships, like between systems, where you want to be able to at least read the cookie, but that other system also can't decrypt an encrypted cookie. But it could look at the signed copy and say, yes, this is digitally signed. It has not been tampered with. Therefore, you know, what V's application has put into this cookie is legit. But it could still read the keys and the values if it needed to. And so if you've ever been on websites where they're like, you know, we have marketing partners and we share data, blah, blah, blah. It could be that they're actually sharing these cookies or that they have visibility into the cookies. But it's typically going to be set in a way that they can view the keys and the values by just being a signed cookie versus like an encrypted cookie.
Okay, so it's basically you would choose an encrypted cookie more about like storage, like over session. It's more about storage than anything else.
Well, sessions and cookies are kind of 2 different things, but Rails stores a session in a cookie. And by default, Rails stores that session as an encrypted cookie.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, go ahead, James.
Yeah, just on that too, doesn't that come back to like if you're on a public Wi-Fi, you want your cookies to be encrypted so nobody else on that can see your cookie and then like steal it? Because only your client-side browser can decrypt it. I don't remember if I'm remembering right from the lesson last mod.
So say this one more time, what you're thinking, like talk through this one more time for me.
It was something about like when we had like, when you go to like a public Wi-Fi, like an internet cafe, everyone there is sharing the same connection, but your client has to have a specific cookie that's encrypted just for you. Otherwise, like anybody else, like when the response is being sent to that like network, it has to know who on the network it's going to. I don't remember if that has something to do with encrypted cookies.
It's not specific to encrypted cookies. It would really be about like, are you sending data in secured, unsecured HTTP?
Okay.
Because if you're in a network cafe and you're connecting to my server, if you're doing that over SSL, then everything, including the headers of everything that we're transmitting back and forth, is also encrypted. And so it lowers the possibility of that attack. But if you're connecting to just like localhost 3000 and you're transmitting stuff, anybody else could set their network card in what we call promiscuous mode, which means they can literally get a copy of every packet going on the network, and they can look at all of that traffic. And if something is sent over in like plain text or unencrypted manner, then yeah, they have access to everything in there.
Okay.
Cool. Appreciate that response, Ian. I wasn't sure. Yeah, go ahead, Phil.
Yeah, kind of just curious to talk through this, like referencing the practice from the lesson. So like when we have a session secret, that's storing like information inside that single like session. So like when I go to my local host and look at the cookie with the extension, I only see the one session. And now because we set session secret, is that inside of that one like encrypted session? And then in the same, like earlier in the lesson, we just set it to cookie secret instead of session secret. And in that case, you can actually see the cookie and it's just the plain text. Am I explaining that right? That when you save it like session secret as a hash value, that's just inside that one same session cookie on the browser?
Yeah, so that's connected to that single browser, right? Like that single browser is the only browser that will be able to then access this session when it sends the next request. And that is part of like the encryption decryption process that's kind of like happening in the background with Rails, where it's like, hey, let's check and make sure that like this is coming from the secret key that or the public key that we expect it to come from as part of that next request. One, I guess I have like a question to put out there that Ian, you could probably answer. It's like when we have, we have a lot of users, right, using our application at any one time and a lot of threads going on. So do I only get one session per request of 4 kilobytes of data, but that is specific to a thread that is happening, like to a process happening coming in from the internet?
Good question. So basically what happens is when I connect to the server for the very first time, if there's no session established, like I don't have a session cookie and I connect to you, or if I clear my cookies and I connect to you, then it's like a session never happened. Rails is going to just generate a random session ID for me, and that actually gets stored as part of the session cookie. And so the next time I connect, I'm sending that cookie back to the server, and the server says, oh, I've got a session cookie. Let me unpack it. Oh, here's the actual session ID. And here's the data that's associated with that. So the session ID is actually part of the session itself. In other languages and frameworks, when they set that session cookie, literally the only thing in that cookie is the session ID. Everything else is stored on the server side. And so the cookie going back and forth tells the server like, hey, I'm session 123. And the server says, oh, okay, I know how to go get that out of my database or off the disk or whatever. And now I've got all that session data in memory. Let's go ahead and continue our conversation. But in Rails, it's storing the session ID and the session data as part of that cookie all in one shot. So it's not specifically tied to like a specific thread in Ruby or a specific process ID. Every session ID is going to be like some randomish sort of string that uniquely identifies that one-time connection. And then when that cookie comes back and forth, it's sort of the way to mimic the state of something in HTTP because HTTP is stateless. And so it's kind of mimicking like, oh, I remember who you are because you've given me this cookie.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. I'm like still wondering like how many sessions can Rails create at like one time? There's got to be like a limit on that, right?
Yeah, it depends on how it generates that session ID. If it's doing like 128-bit number, that's like 18 quintillion or something like that. It's 18 million. So it's going to be kind of a lot. Now, at a practical level, is it actually storing that data? Well, no, because all of that gets stored in the cookie on the browser. So Rails isn't actually storing anything about it. When you connect back to Rails, you're saying, here's my cookie, and Rails unpacks that and goes, yeah, this is a valid session because I've encrypted this and signed it, whatever. And I can validate that this is a valid session. Therefore, I'm going to trust what's in there. Because it's been signed and encrypted, Rails can verify it hasn't been tampered with.
Got it. And so, yeah, this is like one of the use cases, right, of being able to, of Rails storing all of that session information on the client is so that it doesn't have to like worry about, you know, storing the data for multiple sessions, because all of that is stored on multiple browsers, depending on who has accessed it. Cool. Okay, Catherine, go ahead.
Yeah, I just have a question. I'm not sure if this would be a cookie or a server. If I'm like shopping online and I put something in my cart, but I have multiple tabs open and I'm not logged in, how is it that the site, if I refresh one of my other tabs, knows what I have in my cart?
Because the browser, the client is still the same across tabs.
Okay.
I think that's right.
Yep. Yeah. So it's the same browser, so it has access to all the same cookies. So if the server is storing that stuff in the session cookie, then that cookie is available to all of those tabs because you're still the same browser, you're still the same user. The example I like to use is like if I go onto Amazon on my phone and I put something in my shopping cart, and then I go to Amazon on my laptop and I open the shopping cart, everything is still there. So clearly they're not using client-side storage for that. They're actually storing all that stuff on the server instead.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, great question there. I think I saw V had your hand up. Did we answer it?
Yeah, it was what Ian just said about the phone.
Cool. Yeah. Yeah, so that's a good example. Like we, in previous mods, like in previous mod 2s, have had you build out a cart that uses a session to store information from the cart. And that's great. That's one approach. And that's clearly not like the largest e-commerce site in the world's approach, because they just need to be better than that. Yeah. Cool. All right, I think we'll take a break and then I'm going to hop into going through some of the lesson, refactoring what we did yesterday. Yeah, let's do that. So let's come back at 33. All right. Yeah, let's jump into some of this refactoring, some of this implementation. I wanted to kind of like familiarize ourselves with the code from yesterday. Ignore this for now. This is later. So don't worry about that. I'm actually going to put the user's controller here. So we've got our test, our happy path for logging in, right? And when we, we show the user the login form here, then we send over our email and password. We find that user. We authenticate that user. Well, we try to. We try to find it. We try to authenticate it. If that works well, we're going to flash this message. We're going to redirect to the root path. All right. And so that's basically what this test here is accounting for. And what we're going to do is we're going to refactor this into a sessions controller, and we're going to remember this user using a session. All right, that's our goal for today. And I'm kind of going to just be cruising through this. Feel free to stop me if stuff doesn't make sense. But yeah, I think let's run this test. What is this on line 4? Features, this is the login spec. It's not, what is this? User, yeah, cool. And then let's run line 4. Okay, cool. That's where we want to start from. But now I know that all this is happening up here in my users controller, right? And I want this to be in a sessions controller, all right? Because that's generally where we're gonna create sessions and remember users. This user creation, this will stay here, right? Because I want my visitors to be able to register and become a new user. So we're going to leave that here. But when they log in, that's separate functionality, right? That's session functionality. That's to create the session and remember this user across requests. All right, so let's do that. The first thing I want to change is in my routes, right? So right now it's going to a get login to login form, and then it's also going to a post login, and that's going to a user's login. All right, so the thing that I want to change here is I'm going to make this RESTful, and I am also going to use my sessions controller for this. So I'm going to change both of these to sessions, and then I'm going to change this to be a new, and this to be a create. All right, and then I'm gonna run my test, and I'm gonna see what I need to do next, because those are kind of like the two big things that I want to change. Cool, what do we got? All right, uninitialized constant. So let's make this bigger. Click the link, I have an account. Cool, and then that account now is not routing to where my app expects, which would be a sessions controller. All right, so let's go create that. And here, let's make a sessions controller.rb and a sessions controller that inherits from application controller. All right. Now I think I'll get the undefined action or undefined method. Couldn't find it. Cool. Couldn't find action new here for this sessions controller. Cool. So let's do that. And now I won't have a template, is what I assume. We've done this, but it's good to review. So now in my views, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create sessions, and oh, that's not what I wanted. I want a folder called sessions, and I want a file called new.html.erb. Great, now I should have the template, and it's gonna not be able to, well, let's see what it says. Cool, couldn't find the field, emailed, that's not disabled. Now I already have this form, right? Like I already have my form with all made from before. It's called login form.html. I'm simply gonna move this up to my new, so that now it's looking in the right place for this form to show the user the ability to log in. Let's see where that gets us. Cool, action create could not be found. So it looks like it was able to navigate this form still with my test fill in, and then clicks this button log in, but there's no create method in the session. And the reason it's looking for that create, right, in my sessions controller is because of my routes. And let me just, I want to delete this file so we don't have to worry about it anymore. It's blank. Oh, I'm using my mouse way too much. All right. Yeah, let's look at the routes. That's what I wanted to do. Remember, I didn't change like my get, I didn't change my verb, I didn't change my path helpers are the same, right? Like it's just to a post to login and a get to login. And what I changed was which controller they're going to go look for, and I made them RESTful here. I guess it's not totally RESTful, but it's as close as we can get, kind of like routing to these CRUD actions that we're pretty familiar with. Cool. So now, yeah, where am I at? Create. Yeah, can't find an action create. So let's go to the controller. Sessions controller. Great. Let's create this. Tab 9. Love it and I hate it sometimes, but let's see what this gets us. Okay. Expect current path to equal root path. Let's get this test back up. All right, so I clicked login. This looks like it didn't happen. There was no redirect, which I would expect, right? Because my create is doing nothing except kind of like just hanging out, and it's available to be hit, but it's not doing anything. So now I think I want to take what's in my user's controller for logging in and move that over, right? I don't need login form anymore. I deleted that, and that's happening in the session's new action. And I don't need this. All right, I do need this. I don't need the login method. So let's actually take everything here, because I'm also going to need user params, I believe. Let's see. Maybe not. No, I'm using regular params here, so I'm good. I don't need user params. I can leave those here. And let's cut that out and kind of bring it in here. And then get rid of this login method. I don't need that. And I need to get rid of an end. Okay. Formatting is very ugly. Getting closer. Okay, I'm gonna leave it like that. And now I think that this should essentially be the same functionality that we had. And based on what my test is, I think that this should run. So let's look at this test. Login spec. Come on over here. Yeah, now it's basically just happening over here in this new controller. So I kind of expect this test to pass now. I think I'll redirect to the root path. I'll be able to authenticate. Things should be good. Cool, and I did. So great, but we still haven't remembered anything about this user, right, across requests. So maybe I need to implement some of that functionality. So let's add some, I kind of already had these added from the lesson plan, but let's add an expectation that says, hey, if I'm logged in, I should be able to log out, right? I should have an ability to do that. And I also should not see register as a user or I have an account. I don't want to see either of these anymore. Because once I'm logged in, it doesn't make sense for me to register or to try to log in again. So yeah, let's run this and see what the tests say. Okay, expected page to have a link, but there were no matches. All right, so I need to go to my root path, which is where here. My welcome, and I need to add some functionality here. Let's not worry about this form. Let's think about this here, and let's think about a way that I could remember this user, and based on whether there is a user, then I will either show this or not. So yeah, let's make some ERB here. And let's say this is not going to be visible because it's going to be an if current user, and I'm kind of dream driving this current user method. I'm thinking, hey, I know I'm going to need a current user. I'm going to have to make this method, but I'm going to basically be saying like, hey, if there's a current user, then I want to show some stuff. And that will be my link to log out. How do I do link tos like that? And then this is going to go to a, let's dream drive this too. This could be like a, maybe like a log out user path, or we'll just say log out path. Cool. And then this will be within my else, right? Else, if no current user exists, if this value is nil, then let's show these links here so that a user can become a real user. Cool. And space these out. Y'all are awfully quiet. That must mean things are going good or maybe poorly silently.
Hey, Tim.
Hey.
Line 4, line 7, get rid of the equal sign.
Yes, that is a great call. Ryan is paying attention and I appreciate it. All right, let's run this and see what we get. Why it's great to have tests, right? Cool. Undefined local variable or method current user. Interesting. All right. So I have to make this helper method, and I'm thinking I probably want my entire application, all controllers and all views, to have access to a method called current user, because yeah, I'm doing some things here at the root, but I want this method, I want to be able to check my current user all over the place, right? So I'm thinking I will create this method probably in my application controller for that reason. Cool. All right. Let's do def current user, and let's just see if that gets me something else. Cool. Still don't have access to it, so probably need to do a little more. Anyone have any suggestions for me at this point of like, hey, maybe you should try this? Okay, that's fair. Well, the things that I have to do is if I want to declare this as a method that I can give access to the views, then I need to declare it as a helper method. All right. So yes, this is an application controller, which is just great, but my views don't get everything from application controller by default. So I need to say like, hey, this is going to be a helper method. I can do that by saying helper method current user. Okay, let's see if this takes care of my problem. Cool. Expected to find a link log out, but there were no matches. So I'm kind of like back to this error message. So this looks like it ran just fine, but the problem is that this current user was nil, so it showed the else here. And then that, if we look at my test, makes sense that it would fail right here because the link log out is never shown. And let's actually make sure that that's the case by changing that.
Hey, Tim, just quick thing. You have different capitalization on out.
I sure do. All right, cool. It looks like V, you have a question. So I'm where I think I should be.
Do you mind repeating why you needed to put that helper method in the application controller?
Yep, absolutely. So we're calling that method in the view, and views don't have access to methods that we define in our controllers by default. So we can give the views access to any methods that we define in controllers by saying like, by using this helper method, which then like loads it up in the view and gives you the ability to call it in the view.
That is true because like it's not inside like the new method and then the new view. Is that what you're saying?
Well, the controller that is rendering this view inherits from application controller, right? So, and that is where I define this. So all of the controllers are going to have access to this method current user, but the views are not going to load this method up by default. And I'm defining this helper method in my application controller, but I could be defining helper methods in any controller, right? Like I could define them in any controller, but then whatever controller is rendering the current view is the only view that, or that view would only have access to the methods, the helper methods in that controller. Whereas if I put it here in this application controller, now all my controllers inherit from application controller. So all my controllers will have access to this and be able to, and now I know it doesn't matter what controller renders this view, this helper method is available.
And would that take care of the fact that the models won't have access to this method?
No. So this is like, this is a just controller in view method is all we're gonna, is the only place that we're gonna have access to this.
Okay, thank you.
Cool. Yeah, good questions there. All right, let's march on. Now I need this method to probably do something, right? So what I want to do in this method is I want to basically say like, hey, I need to find my current user. So I can do that by saying user.find, and then how do I want to find this? What does find usually look for in an active record model?
The ID.
The ID, great. Do I have access to the ID anywhere based on what I've done so far in this sessions controller, where I'm like grabbing some things? Yeah, how do we think we can make this connection here? Yeah, go ahead, Isabel.
Would it be sessions user's ID?
Yeah, I can use a session. Where do you want me to put that?
On line 6 in the application controller.
Cool.
And then
cool. And so in theory, you're thinking that this will find me the user based on this session.
yes.
All right, let's run it. Cool. All right, so I'm getting an error. Couldn't find user without an ID. That's happening here in application controller, and that was called index.html.erb2. All right, so let's bring up those two things. So it looks like line 2 calls current user, and unfortunately, the current user is not working quite how we want it to right now. So many things called application in Rails. All right, and so let's try and debug this. Why not, right? Let's hit this, and yeah, let's run this test. I'm gonna put this down here so we can look at everything. Great, I'm in this current user. Now, what do I have and not have here? Let's check out what my session is. Okay, the session looks like, okay, not yet loaded. Interesting. That is a helpful piece of that information here. Something to note about sessions, they're lazily loaded. All right, so Rails isn't going to load up a session unless you tell it to, unless you say, hey, I need to set this session somewhere. So even though I've called session user ID here, the session isn't even loaded in this current context. So that's something to note. So let's see if session user ID is a thing. It's not right now. So I've got some work to do still. Anyone have any ideas? Go ahead, Gus.
You want to assign that user ID when the user logs in to create the session.
Okay, and yeah, walk me through that.
So in the session controller, under create, all right, so there's a user and we've authenticated, so they've successfully logged in. So somewhere in that block before you redirect, you would say, either before or after the flash, it doesn't really matter. You would put in like session user ID, and then set that equal to user.id.
Just like this. This is good.
Yes.
Him shut off his speaker, so he can't hear anybody right now.
Oh,
I can't hear you anymore, Gus. I don't know what happened. Maybe I screwed something up. Okay, go ahead.
There you go. Hey, now he can hear us. All right.
Yeah.
My bad. Okay, yes, perfect. I could tell like things were happening and I was not. You know what it is? It's the damn touchpad right up above the keys that I need to hit. So sorry about that. Yeah, equal sign. Okay, and then I'm
equal
gonna
sign, yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna assign this to user.id at this point, right?
Yes.
Cool. Okay, I like this. This is promising. So now when I log in, I find a user, I authenticate that user, and only then do I say, hey, this session user ID is going to be assigned to this user's ID, so that then when I check a current user later on the next redirect, I can actually find that current user. All right, promising. Let's see what we have here. The same error. You hate to see it. This stuff happens all the time. All right, so things to think about in our test here. Let's think about when this current user method is hit first. So let me go into the login spec. Okay, and then I want you over here. All right, so we're following, remember, I'm running this specific test, this happy path. So the first time that I'm hitting this current user method is when? What part of this test? And I'll also put up this index down here so that you can indeed see. Sorry, it's over here, I suppose. I want to put it down here. Ay, ay, ay. I want you down here. Okay, and then this is application controller. V, go ahead.
Sorry, I think I got a little bit lost. Where is this session hash coming from or like being created?
Yeah, so that's a great question. You actually have access to the session in any controller, but it's not necessarily loaded up until you tell the Rails to like, hey, load this up. So yeah, I think this is a great place to not totally understand. You're like, where did this session come from? It lives in your controllers in the background as something you can load up and assign when you need it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Looks like Ryan is next.
Well, you wanted to know when we're hitting the current user in your test?
Yep.
Could you pull up the test again?
Sure can.
I believe line 8, when you visit the root path, that causes this index.html on the bottom left to load, and you don't have a current user then because you haven't yet logged in.
Yep, I haven't logged in. I haven't set the session, right? So I am getting the same. I've done some things to address my error, but this error is happening when line 8 runs. And how could I check that, right? I can put a pry right here, and I don't expect to hit it, right? I expect to get this error. Indeed, I do. So I don't ever even make it to the part of the earlier part of the later part of the test that I was just working on. Okay, so I need a way for this method to also decide, hey, I only want to run this find if my session has been set, right? If this session user ID has been set, then we'll run the find. So I can do that with a guard clause. And so I'll say, if I have this session user ID, let's run the find. If not, let's just skip that process. Let's see. Okay, cool. That looks like I got to this pry now, so I'm in a better place. Let's exit and continue running. Great. New error. This is good. Undefined local variable or method. Logout path. Okay. So at this point, what do I want to do? What do I want to do? I think I probably need to create the logout path, so I'll do that. Let's make this a get, should it be a delete? Should it be a get? Could go either way. I think I will do a get.
It'll need to be a get.
Yeah. Cool. Let's go log out. And then this is going to go to a sessions destroy. Cool. That's what I want there. Anyone know why it needs to be a get at this point?
Is it because we're only going to go to the page and we're not deleting like a actual object? We're just going to be changing the session's params value?
I like that answer, but it's not quite why in this specific case. Any other ideas? Well,
Is it because you haven't loaded the session yet?
so not quite. It's not, doesn't have to do with the session yet, because all I'm doing is basically like telling it like, hey, this logout needs to exist. But if we're looking at the index.html.erb, there's a specific way that I've set this up. Yeah, Grayson, go ahead.
Doesn't a delete normally work where you provide it with like pretty much like a show page in terms of the path that you give it? So it would be like some like users / and then an ID, and that would be your destroy. But there's no corresponding value that you can give it with sessions because it's not in the database.
Yeah, so I love this answer. I love like the why behind this. Like, hey, we usually need an ID because we're going to delete a resource here, right? But we don't have a resource for sessions, so we can't really do it that way. But you don't necessarily need an ID parameter to send a delete HTTP request, although that is like generally what we do. And that's generally like what you will have when you're sending one. Gus, go ahead.
I mean, aren't we, because of the way that we have set up our index.html.erb, like if a link to it defaults to a GET request, and so that's the request that we're sending. Like if we wanted to send a delete request, we could pass it a specific method, but in this case, the method that we're using is GET.
You nailed it. Yep, that's what I was looking for. And that is basically because link2's default behavior is the get. All right. And yeah, I could override the link2's behavior and set the method to be delete, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to leave this as a link, leave it as a get, and do it that way. Yet, I want to just tell everyone that answered, I loved y'all's answers because y'all are thinking through this in a deep way. Okay, cool. So it's a get, log out to session destroy. See where I get now. Whoa, things just worked. All right, let's look at my test now. Login spec. Happy path allows users to log in. Cool. So this user exists. I visit the root, click have an account. Yep, I'm now at the login path. Now I fill it in. I click login. I hit my sessions create method, which let's get it up on the screen somewhere. Let's put it down here. So when I click login, I hit this method. Hey, this user exists. Cool. Yep, I sent in the correct password with my form. Great. I set this session, I flash this success message, and I redirect to the root path. Cool. So now my path is correct. I saw this flash. Now my logic here has been run, and indeed there is a current user that exists because this happens. Now this code runs, and it says, oh, yep, we do have a current user currently. So show the logout and don't show either of these links. This is a pretty complex test, right? We've got a lot of things going on, a lot of steps, but this is basic auth in a nutshell. We got to set a session to remember our user only if they authenticate, and from that point on, we need to be able to use some kind of helper method called current user to access things about that user moving forward. Cool. Cool. Max, go ahead.
Is it standard to use user ID, and are there any like safety concerns with giving out that information?
That is a good question. I think there are no safety concerns because the session is encrypted by default, and storing that information on the browser doesn't actually matter that we're storing it over there because we've encrypted this session, and all the user could see if they looked at edit this cookie is they would see like a hash and a hashed value. What else do I want to say? Let's look at that, right? Remember, we should go and try some of these things. Let's Rails S. La da da. Great. I have an account. I don't think that that's actually an account. Yeah, I haven't created anything. I just want to go do that real quick. So I'm going to go to my console and just create this same test user here. Great, that looks like it worked. All right, and so then I don't know if it works in the same server session, but we're going to try it. And this will be test. Okay, cool. What do I want to do? I want to show y'all stuff. So let's open these. All right. Now, when I hit this login button, I'm going to the sessions create. So I'm actually going to create the session. I should be able to see this happen in my network. I should be able to inspect the request. All right, so let's see what happens. Hey, look at that. Of course, I'll store this in Chrome. Don't worry about that. Okay, so let's look at this request. And what do I want to look at in here? That's interesting. I think, yeah, here we go. Set cookie, mock tracker session. Okay, interesting. That looks like it could be something that is related to things that we were just talking about. So this set cookie is actually, I don't think that that's the exact one that I want. Get the form data there.
That is the one that you want.
Okay, that's what I, okay, cool. Don't have the response yet. Okay, got it. Yeah, okay, so the set cookie is what I want. So this is, you can see mock tracker session. So indeed, now there's this crazy hashed value. I don't see a user's ID here, right? I don't see that, but indeed, my application can remember this user. So that's kind of like the, yeah, that's the, you're seeing the security that's built in with Rails by default here. What else? Let's look at cookies. Cool. All right, so we've got some request cookies that came over. I want you to kind of ignore all of these because these are related. Like you can see set list, order up, all of these things, that's because of the local host, right? And these are request cookies. The one that's important here is this response cookie because this is the session. This is basically that session being set. And that is like what I kind of wanted to show here. Yep, and it tells you, okay, it's this mock tracker session, and it has a value, and it actually comes across in the headers of the response. Cool.
Hey, Tim, can you also go over to the application tab?
I sure can.
And then click on localhost there. Yep. And this will also show all the cookies and the size, whether they're secure cookies or not, and so on.
Yeah.
And
so
also
this,
the expiration date on things.
yeah, let's look at that for this one. Expires when? Looks like a session. Interesting. Whereas these ones actually look like they have a date, a date time, a stamp. So any questions, thoughts, ideas about what's happening there? Aiden, go ahead.
Can you manually set an expiration for a session?
I believe yes.
Is that something that we'll need to do ever?
Yeah, if you want to make sure that like there's a timeout, right? That happens at some point in your application when the browser, you know, hasn't been accessed or hasn't been moved, or just like, hey, guess what? We're a secure site, and maybe every single time the user like maybe every like 30 minutes the user has to like log in because that's our security feature, right? And so yeah, you can do that.
Okay, so when the session, sorry, one more question. When the session expires, it will log out the user and they'll have to log back in. So you can set it so that they just stay logged in, and is that the default? And then if they close the session, that could end it, or the tab, it'll end the session, and then they'll have to log back in again. Am I understanding that correctly?
You are, yeah. I'm not sure what the default time is, but the default is to like keep the session around for quite a while. Like it's not gonna like screw up on you, I don't think, unless I close this.
The session, if it's just flagged as session, as soon as you close the browser, it'll clear those cookies.
Yep. So that's like the interesting yeah, the interesting thing is it's different that like the cookies are hanging around generally to like whatever their expiration date is, unless you manually clear them. Yeah, the session is gonna be you can give it an expiration like time that's sooner than when you close out the browser, but yeah, default is when you close out the browser. Cool. Let's go to V.
We just answered, sorry.
No, that's all right. Cool. Okay. What did I want to look at? What is this app called? Mock Tracker, right? Here it is. Cool. Cool. All right. So now what I want y'all to do is first take a break because we went for a little while. And second, when we come back from that break, I'm gonna give you like 15 minutes to attempt to complete the logout functionality. Then I'll show you how it's done. And then I'm gonna like get into some of the API finagling that we're gonna do. And yeah, let's take a break. Come back at 19. All right, let's come back together and get it going again. Looks like Sydney, you have your hand up from before. Sorry, I didn't get you sooner.
Oh, no, you're fine. Just in your create, when we moved the create method, we didn't hit our else, but if we did we need to now render new because that login form is gone, correct?
Correct.
Okay, cool.
Yep. Yeah, so this right here is kind of like what you're talking about. This, if we hit our else here, login form is no longer there, so we need to render.
Yes.
You're not sharing your screen anymore.
Oh, my bad, my bad. Thanks for that. Let's share. Yeah, so what this was here is login form, and this is why this would have failed if I would have run the entire test suite. I was focused in on that one suite or that one test. But instead of rendering login form now, that's not what we have. We need new to render this form that's attached to that method. And yeah, the one other thing that I wanted to show y'all is we want to use memoization just in case for our current user method, in case that within the same process or the same request, we need to access this current user more than once, right? Like we're only accessing it once here, but say that the nav bar needs to access it, other parts of the page check for the current user. There could be a lot of reasons that you need to access this. So we'll use memoization here. We'll set a current user instance variable that will basically, what this is doing now is saying like left side of the or equals, which is the memoization, I guess you could call it a symbol. On the left side, it's like, hey, if this value exists, use this value. Otherwise, let's go and actually run this code. So let's run this like find if this session user ID exists. The key to this is the first time that this runs, it's going to set this value. And now we never have to run the code on the right side that goes to the database again. All right, we just have the current user loaded up. Go ahead, Max.
Can you have multiple sessions open at the same time?
Multiple sessions. You got to say more about that.
I know that we're building this so that it doesn't display login if you already logged in. But let's say you open it in another tab. Could you log in with a separate account, or what does Rails do behind the hood to prevent you from doing that? Or maybe this would never come up.
Well, the whole thing with the session, right, is it's attached to that client, right? So it's attached to your browser in this case. So another tab shouldn't change around the functionality. Another client, right? If you go to Safari and you were using Chrome, now that will have different functionality because those are different clients, where you could potentially log in as two separate users, but you'd have to use two separate clients there.
Gotcha. And could you log in to the same account from two separate clients, or does Rails prevent that with its session?
That's a good question. I'd have to go test that, but I think you should be able to do that still, because I think it would just be like a new cookie for both, but you'd be logged in. Like it would just be a new process, right? A new session, new cookie, new everything like stored on that client, but like it's okay that you're logged in twice, basically, two separate clients. Is that right, Ian? Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Basically, because you're connecting with a new browser, Rails is going to see that connection. You're not sending a session cookie. It's like, I don't know who you are. It's going to make you log in. And when you log in, it'd be like, all right, you're user 5, here's your session. And then that's, it's going to keep track of that. So no matter which browser you're in, you'll have effectively the same data in the cookie, but they're going to be encrypted differently. So like the cookies won't be exactly identical between the two systems. But internally, they're going to hold the same, user ID 5 or whatever.
Cool. Good questions there. All right. I've got, what do I want to do here? I want to push up. If you haven't been following along, like coding along, that's fine. Yes. Okay. I want to push this up so that you have it attached to our repo on this branch, sessions and cookies. Add. All right, cool. So yeah, this repo will be like basically set up. The thing that it will have that you don't have yet is your configuration for the API key. That's okay. Shouldn't break anything there. It should just like not authenticate when it tries to hit the API. But I don't even think that will come up because that only happens when you submit the form. So this will have all the up-to-date code we've done till now. If you want to like clone down that branch, let me drop that in. I'll just drop it in chat. And let's take 10 minutes on this. And yeah, try and implement the logout functionality. What do we need to do that? How do we need to ensure that, the session no longer exists? Cool. All right, I'm going to open up these rooms and see y'all in 10.
All right, so I wanted to open this up to y'all. Did anyone get the logout functionality to a place that they're like, yeah, this is, I got it to log out. I want to show this. Cool, Sam, go ahead.
Oh, show it. Oh, well, that's a gotcha. Okay. So at the very beginning, well, let me actually share my screen. I mean, I was just looking for a built-in because it seems like sessions, I was thinking of actually just setting session user ID equals to nil. And that will take care of specifically just the user ID. And then I thought at that point, like, what if there's actually more things in the session outside of user ID that's being transferred? So there is a built-in called session clear. I didn't make tests for this, just prefacing that. I was just messing around in Pry. So I could show this off on my browser and logging in here, admin, and to log out, it's session has nothing. Session doesn't have a user ID anymore. And to me, it does seem like it just nils out every key, I guess, because it's nil now. So that's my conclusion from this.
Yeah.
But we're back to this here, where it's back to the, yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate you running through kind of like the two ways of doing it. Yeah, I think if you want to keep some session data around, but you want to just clear one key, then you can set it to nil the same way you would in a hash. But if you're like, hey, no, this is like all of this session data needs to go, clear will get that done for you. That's just, yeah, like Ian said in the chat, it's a hash method that kind of clears out all the keys, all the key value pairs. Hate to hear that you don't write tests in 2010. Very sad. Just glad that you went through that though. But yeah, that's kind of all I need to see. Do we have some follow-up questions on that functionality. Yeah, go ahead, Ryan.
I had a question about the test. So is there a way to mimic logging in without having to go through the whole process of logging in? Yeah, I'm guessing like we just make a new user, we create a user, and then we say like session dot user ID is assigned to current user dot ID. Would that mimic it? Or should I go through the whole login of the form in a test?
Yeah, there's a way to do it where you don't have to go through all the login, and it's like allow any instance of, I believe is the way that you do it. Allow any instance of this user to be
Current user.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're saying allow any instance of, and then you give it the symbol of the method name. So we're just stubbing out the method and giving a forced response. So we say anywhere, anytime we call current user, I always want to return this user object. The caveat with that though is when you create the user in your test and then set that stub, if you ever change anything about that user, like if they have friends, if they're storing something in the database tied to that user ID, and then later on you try to do something with current user is still stubbed to the first user object where you stubbed it. And so it's not gonna, when you call current user later, it's not gonna have any of that data. And so if you're trying to do a lookup later, like current user.friends, it's going to go look at the original user and go, that user doesn't have any friends. And so you will have to do like a database reload or something like that in your test, or you restub it, or like refetch the user object and restub it at that point. There's a handful of ways that we can help you with when you get to that point, but that will be one caveat that you'll hit.
Thank you.
I know a couple of y'all have run into this issue before where you had to like call the reload option because you're like still referencing the object that was loaded up in the test, but something about the object was changed elsewhere in the application. So you have to reload that data change. So some of you might be familiar, some of you just try to keep it in mind that the test object that you create or that you stub maybe as the current user is not going to be updating its data or any of its data unless you call a dot reload on it or restub it with like a new object. Cool. All right, yeah, I want to run through this API stuff with you real quick. Don't look at my screen. Okay, now you can look. Cool. So what do I want to show y'all? Another use case, right? So I'm gonna get rid of that. Sessions controller we don't need. All right, so let's review what I've got in this. What is it? ProPublica controller. Cool. So just like a reminder, I'm using Faraday. It's very similar to like how we did in mod 2 down here. The only thing I'm doing here is I'm spinning up a new connection so that I can set a header, and I'm doing that in a block here. So that's the difference between doing like a get right here already. I don't do my get until down here, and I have like a base URL, and then I add to the base URL here. And this is all based on like, hey, the ProPublica API told me I need to set this API key in the header. So I had to go do it this way, right? Like that's they decide how their API is going to function. And yeah, that's the whole thing. So maybe what I want to do is, yeah, I want to basically, before I can search, I basically added a form where I can search for a member of Congress by last name. And if I find that member of Congress, then I can do some other stuff with it. I'm not sure what that other stuff is, but that's what we're going to do. So let's look at that functionality, and I'm going to put a pry in here. And I'll actually put a pry a couple places because I want to show you some other stuff. Yeah, and one thing that you probably are looking at and saying, what is this? Figaro is like a gem to store environment variables. And like I've gone and set that stuff up. If you have the API key, you could replace this line with just the API key and like it will set it the same way. The thing to think about there is now you're exposing your API key. So you don't want to push that up to the internet. You don't like, that's not a good thing for ProPublica starts to see that, or GitHub starts to see that, and they get unhappy. So don't push it up if you do that. But if you want to like demo it out, you can definitely do that by just putting your API key right there where it says figaro.env ProPublica key. Okay, so localhost, great. All right, so I've got this form here, and it's search for senators by last name. Who's got a senator's last name for me? Sanders. All right, let's do Sanders. So let's search. I should hit my prize if things are going the way that I expect. Yep. All right. So let's inspect here. So I'm hitting this pry on line 21. Let's bring up the code over here. Yeah. What the heck is happening here? Okay. All right. So here's the code over here, and I'm hitting this pry on 21. And let's see what JSON is. Okay, cool. My status is okay. I like seeing that first because that means like, okay, I did indeed hit my API correctly. But the way that this API is set up is I have to get all of the members of Congress, and then, and only then, can I decide based on having all of those members, if I want to like hit the API again. And the way that this API is set up is I need a member ID to then hit a separate endpoint where now I can just get information about that member ID. All right. So I've gotten all the Congress members here. And then if I, basically I save all of the members here, and let's do this. What is going on here? So I've got JSON, which is this big hash, and then I'm just navigating this hash the same way I would navigate any nested structure, right? So JSON results, I can see, okay, that gives me an array. How do I know that? Remember, I can do something like this. Okay, that's an array. And then I can see like, okay, the first thing I need to get to this hash that looks like it's nested as the first item of the array. So that's when I say 0. Okay, now I'm in there. Cool. And now I see that there's this members, which looks like another nested hash pointing at the members hash. So then that's what I do here. And I say, all right, members. Right, and I'm just digging into this data structure, right? I didn't really know what to expect here, but I'm like, okay, like I know that there are going to be some senators in here. And now I have an array, and it looks like I have an array of hashes, and those hashes are specific senators. So that's how I dug in. I did that on 22. Now, if I exit again, I'm hitting this next pry. And now I'm doing a simple, I'm grabbing whatever the search value is from params, which in this case, I would assume is Sanders. Cool, it is. And then I'm basically saying like, hey, iterate over this array and find me a last name that is equal to whatever came over in my search params. Cool. And then then return me that value, right? So that's what find will do. And so indeed, look at this. We've got Bernard Sanders found, and we've got quite a bit of information about him. And this ID value is going to be something that I would need if I wanted to send another request later on and just get Sanders's Senator Sanders information. But maybe I'm like, okay, I searched for this senator and I have some information, and maybe I want to add this to be, add Senator Sanders to be like a favorite. And maybe I say like, hey, when you come to my website, you get favorites, they hang around for 30 days and yeah, you get to track your favorites that way. Can anyone think of a way that I can track these from request to request? And any suggestions of how I might be able to do that? Participants.
The V is suggesting using cookies in the chat.
Great, let's do that. So let's use some cookies. We haven't really done that too much. So, all right, I want to track a favorite, and I don't, what's the benefit of cookies? We're not going to track them in the database. We're just going to assign them to the web browser, right? We're going to store them over in the client. Cool. So let's do that. I don't want to do this, but I do want to do, all right, let's say I have this found member, right? And he has a lot of values. Let's think of one that might be completely unique. Let's do his name. So, or yeah, let's do Twitter account. Twitter account, send Sanders. All right. So I'm gonna say I have a cookie, cookies, and then, or this is probably cookie. What do I have? Found member. And then I need to get, let's say, Twitter. Twitter, what is it? Twitter account. Twitter account. And I will set that, I'll assign that to maybe, let's say, actually, let's do this by last name. I'm gonna do this slightly different. Let's do last name, because I think these senators' last names are unique, but it doesn't matter if they're not. And we'll assign this to be, now I want another hash, and I want this to be like some information that I would like to store in a cookie and persist that's unique to this senator. So now I might say, okay, I want the C-SPAN ID. So let's do that. So we'll say C-SPAN ID, and we'll set that to found member C-SPAN ID. And then we'll also do like maybe a phone number for Senator Sanders, which is somewhere. Phone. Okay, cool. That's here. Let's do that one too. And that'll be enough for now. Found member phone. Cool. Okay, that looks good to me. Now I need to get these pries out of here. And I need to exit, and I need to run this again because Pry is not going to update with all of these changes that I did here. Let's exit. Cool. And then what do we want to do? We probably want to do something like redirect to I don't know where we want to go. Root path sounds great. And then let's do one other thing. Let's flash a notice that says Senator, and then we'll interpolate the name here, which will be this. Found. Cool. I'm not doing any sad paths, but let's restart the server just in case. Cool. Yeah, let's see. I don't know why my search is blocked out. Oh, because I need to reload this page. It was stuck in Pry. All right, so let's do Sanders again, and let's open up the network tab. I want to see this, and let's do a search. Did I hit a Pry? Oh, nope. Undefined local variable or method cookie. That must be cookies. My bad. Let's go back. Try it again. Senator Sanders found. Great. Let's look at our cookie store now. I want to look at the requests first. I think it's here. Cool. I've got a session coming back. Doesn't look like I've got any cookies there. Let's look at the response headers though. This is based on my session. I was hoping to get a cookie that was set here. Let's look at the application. And sort this by name. Mock trash tracker. Okay, so it doesn't look like it's set correctly, and I'm not sure why. So let's try one more thing. Edit this cookie. Yeah, I've only got that, and then is there any other? I don't think so. Okay, let's just do this. Let's look at the code and say cookies. All right, I'm looking, any suggestion? Did I screw up this cookies thing? Doesn't look like it. Let's, hey, what do we usually do? Let's throw a Pry in there. Yeah, let's hit this again. Yeah, go ahead.
Just a quick question. Back in the code, I'm thinking about other things that we use the similar syntax on line 7. Wouldn't you have to wrap the after cspan_id for that to apply to both things that you pass there? Wouldn't you have to wrap that somehow?
I was under the impression that based on like talking with Ian earlier that you could do this with this hash and it would stringify by default. It would just stringify this value. What I'm thinking is happening is like maybe this is too big or like I just did this wrong somehow. But what I really want to do is like kind of look at what the cookies stash looks like at this point and see like what's going on, because I truly don't know. So we're gonna find out. All right, so great, we found Sanders. Let's find him again. Waiting. Oh, I probably hit my Pry, which is good. So let's look at cookies. That's not how you do that. Okay, so great, it has my session. So let's look at what cookies, what was it? The last name, I think is what I set to it. Yeah, found member, last name. Ooh, that might be a nil value. Is this nil right here? Nope, okay, so it's Sanders. So let's do cookies. Sanders. See if I get anything. It's nil. Okay, so it's not setting this cookie properly because I can't just like tell it that, well, let's try to do it a different way. Let's try to do cookies, Sanders, and set it this way. is equal to, let's say found member ID or found member phone number. So we'll just do a simple number here. Okay, that looks like it ran. All right, and now this value does exist. So I think what's happening here is I'm just not setting this right. Like I can't just set it to a hash. I was under the impression that I could, but remember, these are simple, it's a simple data store, right? We want to try to keep it to just strings or numbers, but I was under the impression I could do it this way. That's okay. I think we'll be able to see this cookie now at least. Go ahead, Aiden.
Yeah, would you be able to, if you did want to do that as a hash, would you be able to just use like JSON.parse or generate to just actually parse that out, the other half of the cookie?
Yeah, I like that. I like that idea. I think that is like the ideal next attempt, right? Like let's generate some JSON from this hash, right? Like let's just JSONify this before we try to set it and then see if that will set it instead of the way that I did it, which is like just a regular hash. Yeah, so I think that would be my next probably step in this if we had time. But what I really want to do is just kind of like show y'all this. So this should redirect. And then now, in theory, we'll have this cookie somewhere. Let's look for Sanders. Oh my goodness, there it is. You love to see it. So I've set this now, and now this exists on the browser, right? I stored it over there. And now anytime I need this cookie, I can, hey, the next request, it's coming over. And I have the ability that I can access it. And maybe I'm like, okay, like I need to store some cookies from this request. Basically where I was trying to go is like, this use case is like, hey, got some data from the API, right? Did a search on that data, found what I wanted. But maybe I want to like add a favorite and I need to like do that for 30 days and set that on the browser. Maybe I need to do it in the database and I want my favorites to be attached to a specific user. And so I need to like store some favorite data, favorite senators to this specific user. And I need to do that in a favorites table that has a foreign key of user ID, right? Like maybe I set up my app that way, but the key is here. Now I can persist data across requests, right? Using cookies. Does it need to, when I'm using a cookie, it's like, does it need to be signed? Does it need to be secure? Can I expose that? Do I care about any of that stuff? Do I just want to expose it just as is? Great. Or should I use a session for it, right? Is this something that I want to take advantage of Rails's built-in security features that are built into a session? And do I want to also like take advantage of the speed of storing all that session data on the browser? Like what do I want to do from this point? And you have a lot of options is kind of like where I wanted to get at. Yeah, all right, I ran into lunch a little bit, so sorry about that. You don't have to respond to the attendance thread until 1:03. Tell Ian I said so. And any final thoughts? Y'all are free to go, but I'll stick around for questions.
I had a quick question about, if you did have a cookie that was like too large for like that 4 kilobyte limit, would you be able to break it into like separate cookies, or would that like mess up the way like it's ID'd?
You could break it up into separate cookies, but they would all need to have like, actually, no, I don't think that'll work. I think that is the limitation there, because like I was going to say, oh no, you can just make different IDs, but the cookie itself is, I want to say like each individual ID and value are a separate cookie, right? That is 4 kilobytes, but I'm not sure if that's right. I think there's a chance that it's like one cookie store per request, and once you run out of that, like you're done. but I haven't run it up against this limit. And so it could, this is a good thing for us to like go and like kind of dive a little deeper on and figure out like, when I call cookies, is that referring to my single 4 kilobyte like limit, or do I get a 4 kilobyte limit per ID that I set, like per actual cookie? And I'm not sure, but that's like a good thing for us to like go figure out, because we can just look that up.
Cool, thanks.
Yeah.
Is there a convention, or did we talk about the convention for that destroy session? Like, is reset_session the right way to go? Like, that does pass my test, but I don't know if that's like acceptable, because session.clear also passed my test. So
Yeah.
I don't know which is better.
That is a good question. I would say, like, to me, the one that makes sense is reset session, because Rails gives it to you, right? If they give you a helper method by default, then it's like, why am I reinventing the wheel and using a hash method to clear all those values? But here's what I'll say is the reset and clear probably work slightly different, where clear is probably like using the same session, and reset session is probably like assigning a whole new key for that specific session. I would go with reset session, unless you want to like clear some data but persist the same. Like, say you are using a session to store favorites and a user that's logged in, right? So if you were doing it that way and you had a session favorites pointing at something and then a session user IDs pointing at something, at that point, you would want to have probably separate functionality that was like, hey, I want to have a way to clear this user's favorites, but also keep them logged in, right? So in that use case, you would do a session favorites and assign it to nil, and you actually wouldn't use clear or reset session. You would be like, oh, I'm actually just taking a specific piece of the session data and clearing it, and I can do that the same way I would for a hash. If you're like, nope, I want, like, this is a security flaw and I need to reset the session, every 10 minutes or something like that, because I don't want any of that data persisted, then I would go with reset session.
Okay, thank you.
Totally. Lunchtime, yeah. All right, y'all. Yeah, thanks for hanging out and thanks for the great questions today. See y'all.
Thanks, Tim.
Yep.